Hello everyone, welcome, I'm Robert, and today I want to discuss Comanchería, the rise and fall of the Comanche Empire by GMT Games and designed by Joel Toppen. So first, let me give you some background. I'm not primarily a wargamer when it comes to my solo board game tastes, but I've heard great things about this title for years, and I'm always up to try a GMT solo-only title. Other solo GMT titles I've played include Fields of Fire, Space Empires 4X, Conquest of Paradise, and Mr. President. I played a first edition copy, but I used the second edition rule set to learn. I played a total of 3 times, one of them being the tutorial, but make no mistake, games are pretty lengthy, so it stayed on my table for over a week. I achieved victory on the basic scenario by my 3rd try. And now let's move on to a game overview. In this game you play as the Comanche people in scenarios ranging various historical periods from 1700 to 1875. You vie for control of the American South. You'll need to acquire resources like food, captives, guns, and trade goods by exploiting the land and through trade, which will be key to maintaining your population and turning the tide in battles. You'll also make enemies and/or allies with the local indigenous tribes, as well as the encroaching colonizing factions, like the Spaniards, Mexicans, and Americans. I would also describe this game as a 4X light game with pandemic-style crisis management elements. It is also very procedural, with very detailed step-by-step phases. The game features a very unique, ingenious, and sophisticated AI system that adapts and reacts to your actions, unlike any I've seen in my extensive board gaming experience. Games are lengthy, as going through each of the turn's meticulous phases involving player decisions and AI upkeep take quite some time. The game includes an event deck for each of the 4 historical periods, which keeps things varied and thematically include important events from their date range. You also have available Tech 3 cards that you can purchase, known as culture cards, in various categories like warfare, politics, trading, and more, which will give you powerful abilities and offer different approaches. Scenario victory conditions involve having control of a certain amount of areas on the map by the end of the current historical period, which can vary in length. So while you can make an approximate estimate of how much time you'll have to accomplish your goal, you never know exactly how many turns you'll have to accomplish your goal, putting pressure on you. You can also lose if you run out of political or cultural points, or if you get wiped out from the map. So now let's move on to what I liked. So first I have to mention that this is a solo-only game, so it's not a multiplayer game with a solo mode, and I always appreciate a game like that. However, I'll mention that the game has such meticulous turns that it kind of feels like almost like controlling a second player to some degree when it comes to the amount of upkeep that entails that. Another really cool thing is watching your small, burgeoning tribe becoming a force to be reckoned with, because you're going to be expanding and attacking other tribes and also enemy settlements. So your empire will become vast if things go well by the end of the scenario. And as I mentioned before, the game boasts an incredible and unique AI system. It is intuitive to learn. I would say it's one of the easiest things to learn about the game, and it is not 100% unpredictable. You have an idea of the things that the AI could possibly do by looking at the AI column and area of the map. But there is also, through dice rolls, a possibility that the AI will do something completely different. So there's always that small chance that you don't know what the AI is going to do, but you can at least somewhat try to prepare around what it might do, if that makes any sense. So it is predictable, but not at the same time. Also, when it comes to it adapting to you, I say that because depending on what you do on your turn, like for example, if you do lots of success checks, which makes you draw from the success cup, there's a pretty good chance that you'll make the AI do more things on their turn. So if you go and attack recklessly, you might be giving the AI really big turns. So you have to be careful to either try to mitigate bad success checks or attack sparingly if you don't want the AI to have a giant turn. So yeah, in other words, it adapts to you and you adapt to it. So there's like this back and forth with it that is very unique. I've tried many AI systems and the one here is just ingenious. Another thing I like about the game is just seeing how the board state evolves over time. I played the same scenario multiple times, but even the basic scenario is pretty meaty. And even though the opening with the setup of the scenario is pretty much the same when you first start, how the board evolves is so cool, and it was very different every time that I played. So, depending on dice rolls for the AI, maybe some of the factions will do more things in one play than in the other. So you might see some of the colonizer factions, setting up, settlements and expanding more, while in another game, maybe the local tribes will end up acting more and working against you, or maybe allying with you. So which faction will act more compared to others will just vary through dice rolls. But even though it's random, it's just gonna keep games fresh every time. One of the things I really like about this game is how it encapsulates the subject matter. So prior to this, I had never really read any substantial material on the American indigenous people, but in the last few years, for some reason, I have had some interest in them, and that's one of the reasons. Not only because this game has a bit of a reputation, but the subject matter does attract me. So I bought the game, and I have to say that after reading some of the material that is recommended by the designer for you to understand the background of what's being represented in the board game. I just have to say that I love how the game translates what the Comanche people were going through in board game form, and how it captured some of the events thematically. In one way, yes. I mean, you might say it as homework, like reading the material. To me, it really didn't feel like homework. It was very fascinating reading about this. And you don't even need to go to entire books necessarily. If you want to play the first scenario, which covers the first 50 years, just read the sections of the book that cover the first 50 years, and you'll see how the designer implemented events, factions, and how the Comanche people acted into the game. Is really just incredibly fascinating, and I have never experienced a GMT board game in this manner. But yeah, if you supplement your gaming experience here with some reading material, I'm telling you, it is just a delight. So yeah, I highly recommend reading what the designer recommends with the reading material. It really will enrich your experience here. Hopefully, you will have even the slightest amount of interest in the subject matter. And again, even though I had never ever read about this, it was just really awesome consuming this material and seeing how the designer, translated this in board game form. It's just magical. Another cool perk of the game is the quick setup. So if you have tokens organized, especially if you keep a little bag for all the tokens that you're gonna need to set up the board initially, you can set this game up in about 10 minutes or less. It really is that quick to set up. If you know where to put the tokens, just arrange them on the board, shuffle a couple decks, and you're pretty much good to go. It really is that quick to set up. You will need a pretty big table though, just a heads up. I also love the presentation of the game, the usage of fonts, the backgrounds, the imagery. It really does justice to the subject matter. Incredible graphic design, and typically this is the case for GMT games, although it can be a pretty simplistic in some areas. It has such a charm to it that I love the presentation of and the graphic design of the game. Top notch. Another thing I really like is the scope of the game. So even though you start really small on one corner of the map, the factions that are really far from you can still affect you because they can attack your culture. So if you don't look out for your culture points, and if you let them expand too much or don't prepare accordingly to factions that are pretty far from you attacking your culture, you could lose. So it is really interesting seeing how a faction that is pretty far from you can still affect you, even though you might potentially, depending on the scenario, you might not even be able to reach that far and attack them with your bands. And I also have to commend the game for the strategic depth that it offers. Now, in a con that I will discuss later, initially what you are supposed to do and how you should use your turn actions to their best ability is not going to be evident for quite some time initially, and this seems to be a common complaint. Even after you go through the tutorial, you're not quite sure what to do. But as you play the game, it'll click, and the actions and their usefulness will become evident. And there is definitely strategic depth with the game here, with how you buy your culture cards, when to buy them, when to attack, when not to, when to trade, where to establish new bases known as rancherias, where to move them, because one interesting thing about your bases here is that they're mobile, which is a pretty unique feature of these types of 4X games. Usually when you set up a base, it's stationary, you don't move your base, but that's another thing that's unique about this, and it's representative of the Comanches because they were nomadic people. So you are going to be moving your bases, and there's a strategic element to where you should move it, if you should move it. So there's definitely plenty of layers here, and there is meat in this game, is what I'm saying. And finally, one of the things that I want to mention is the fantastic player aids that this game includes. So some of the best that I have ever seen. Once you internalize the rules, which can be definitely a barrier, which I'll talk about later, but once you get over that, you pretty much can play just off of the player aids, and you'll rarely have to consult the rule book. And this is helped by how procedural the game is, and you just have to follow the turns very meticulously. But once you do that, you can just refer to the player aids, and turns will go faster. So fantastic player aids, just a masterclass. Okay, so now let's move on to some cons. All right, folks, so first and foremost, my biggest con, I'm not gonna lie, the learning experience was pretty brutal, okay? I'm not primarily a wargamer, like I said, and GMT has definitely a particular way that they write their rulebooks. I did overcome the Fields of Fire rulebook, which, as I've mentioned in the past, was my very first solo board game, and I don't recommend that's anybody's first solo board game. But that's why I'm in this hobby now, because I persevered and it opened me up to this world. So in this case, that is also the case, okay? I persisted, I stuck with it, and I was handsomely rewarded because, as I've already mentioned, I think this is a fantastic experience. And unlike the Fields of Fire rulebook, at least the older ones, it's not that the rulebook is bad per se. This is just a very, very time-consuming process. And like I said earlier, even if you do go through the tutorial step by step, by the end of it, you're not going to be quite sure what you're doing. So the tutorial is pretty good, but the strategic aspect of the game, as far as what you should be doing every turn, is really not going to be very clear, but it will become apparent once you actually just play a couple of games. And trust me, it will eventually click if you're willing to persist. Still, I routinely saw reviews expressing how they got completely lost, and in the process they gave up. And honestly, I don't blame them because I almost gave up myself. Another thing is that some of the rules or turn steps might seem obtuse at first. You're not gonna really quite understand why the designer included certain turn steps or certain rules that seem weird, but the more you play the game, these rules will become apparent why the designer included, either for design or logical reasons or for thematic reasons. I also made the mistake of reading the rulebook prior to going through the playbook tutorial, and actually I do not recommend that anybody does this. If you are planning to buy this game, just go through the playbook tutorial, and it really does just a great job at introducing you to concepts and walking you through it. You'll still need to play it a couple times later so that it fully clicks, but if you read the rulebook, I honestly kind of found it a waste of time. I wasted a couple hours reading it because you really can't understand what the rulebook's talking about without the context. So after you go through the tutorial, you're only gonna need to consult the rulebook on a need-to basis. So I just think it works best that way. So I suggest that that's how you do it if you plan to get the game. But at the end of the day, folks, as I said, I'm really glad I stuck with it. And another thing that I found indispensable that I also suggest that you get, it's a turn tracker file that I downloaded, which helps me track where I'm at in the turn just using a little cube. It's a letter size file. I'm going to link it. I highly suggest you get that. Again, I found it indispensable because where you are in the turn can be really disorienting in this game. So having some kind of device like that to know where you are in the turn steps was of huge help. So I'll link that file. All right, and another minor con that I have to mention is that when you set up the game, the initial row of event cards is fixed, which makes opening moves a bit samey. But don't worry, because the game evolves. The board state evolves completely different every time after a couple turns. So the game will evolve in a completely different direction every time through your success tests, through the way that the AI acts, through dice rolls. So it will evolve, but the opening moves are gonna be a bit samey every time. You can do different moves, but I can't see myself doing different moves many times unless I play a later scenario, which I haven't tried. And finally, I have to mention the length, and this might be a potential con. So it might not 100% be a con necessarily, but I'm just warning some people. This is not a game that you are likely gonna set up and tear down in the same day unless you don't do absolutely anything else. Because as I said, the turn structure is very involved. So I would estimate that even if you have the rules down pat, unless you lose early on to some bad rolls, you're probably gonna have this game through the entire weekend. So that might be music to your ears. It might be a con. Just giving you a heads up. So if you want something that sets up quick and plays all day, this might be good. Might be bad for you if you want to play multiple games in the same day. So just a heads up. And now let's move on to my final thoughts. All right, folks. So in conclusion, this is one of the most unique games that I have played. And I have to again reiterate that the experience is intensely strengthened by having even the smallest amount of interest in the subject matter. Even if you have even a bit of interest in history and the American indigenous people, just read at least any kind of material covering the first 50 years from 1700 to 1750. And once you do this really just even without that, the game is meaty and it's interesting. But once you understand that background, this really is just one of the most fascinating board game representations of a historical event or subject. This is such a unique subject that it doesn't really get as much exposure. And seeing how Joel thematically interweave the subject matter into the design of the game, into the events, into how you navigate the world with your Comanches. It really is just fascinating. Do be prepared for a grueling learning process, not for the faint of heart, even for seasoned gamers like me. Maybe if you are used to GMT rulebooks more than I am, it won't be as bad. Again, I'm not primarily a war gamer, and GMT has their own style, their particular style that they design rulebooks. But this really was a very brutal learning process, very time consuming. You're gonna be scratching your head, and I almost gave up. And I've seen a common complaint of people giving up while learning the game, and I don't blame them, honestly. But if you're willing to stick with it, there is a super rich and rewarding experience at the end. And so I am in the process of consuming those materials that the designer suggested, and I am planning to revisit the game in a few months after I've consumed more of them to completion. And I'm interested to see how the rules will stick after a few months. I really want to play this game again after at least reading one or two of the books or listening to them, because I'm listening to them in audiobook form to completion. Folks, I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you have any comments, questions, feedback, go ahead and put them in the comment section. And if you enjoy this content, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.